Hey, I want to dive into our third week in our message series called Strapped today. And if you're new with us, man, you can go online and check out all of the teaching. It's all there on the Compass webpage or on the YouTube channel. All the teaching that you would have missed is all right there. And each one of these lessons that we've been talking about regarding money and how we manage that and how we think about money, all these things sort of building on each other. And so we're going to pick up this week with some very, very practical stuff. But just as a review, in the first week of our message series, we talked about, man, most people are strapped. Most people are strapped with debt. We're strapped with money stress. We're strapped with money arguments and fights at home, and we're just worried, and we're just underfunded and overwhelmed when it comes to our finances, and so we needed a new way to look at money. So the first week we said, man, God looks at this stuff differently, and we don't serve money as Christians. We're supposed to serve God, and money is supposed to serve us as we serve God. It's supposed to work that way. It's supposed to be a tool in our hands and not us being kind of used and manipulated by money. And then last week, man, so exciting to have James Peterman, one of our elders, to share about how, man, we've got to take some responsibility for how we spend money. We got to be more self-controlled, and we got to show some restraint and even some sacrifice at times if we want to be wise about how we're handling money. And one of the things we sort of introduced last week was that, man, I know it often feels like a lot of our stress and our problems would be solved if we had a little bit more income. But we tend to not have an income problem. We tend to have a spending problem. And this is true, right? As you think about your income from the time that you first ever had a job until now, you probably started with one level of income, and then as you went on, maybe each job you got a little bit more money, or you got a pay increase, or you stayed at a company, you got some raises or some bonuses, and if you were to track that over time, your income level kind of goes up and to the right. Maybe some of you it goes like this, and that's great, and some of you are kind of like this, and you're really bored with the job you're in, but either way, it goes up and to the right. Now, here's the question. What about your lifestyle? How has that gone over that same period of time? And your spending, how has that gone? Have you kind of stayed exactly the same expenses all that time? Same size house, same car, same phone, all those different kind of things? Or have we increased our spending and that's sort of kept up with any income increases that we've had along the way? Most of the time, our income, we raise that to the level of our spending, sometimes even a little past the level of our spending, and that has kept up the whole way. And so the truth is that if we had a little bit more income, we would just spend a little bit more. And so it's not an income problem, it's a spending problem. And today we really want to dive into, all right, well, what are the nuts and bolts then of starting to experience a different outcome when it comes to money? And it's going to come down to you and me being better managers of money and better savers of money. Managers and savers of money. If we want to get unstrapped, we have got to create some financial margin. And what are we talking about with some financial margin? Well, here's what we're talking about. We're talking about if you take all of our cash resources, all of our income, all of the stuff that we have, all of our resources, and subtract from that all of our cash uses, everything that we use money on, then what is left is the margin. And here's the reality. For most of us, we live with zero margin. You take everything that comes in, you subtract everything that goes out, and there's nothing left. And that is why we experience so much stress when it comes to money. It's why we experience so many of the different emotions that we have. It's why we have the money fights and the money arguments. It's why we worry. It's why we're constantly pursuing more stuff and more income, and we're trying to, buy things that we can't afford yet because we just don't know how we would live without that. And so we work ourselves in this situation where as our income goes up, our expenses go up, and we just don't have any margin. How do you create margin? Well, you have to have a plan. We have to have a better way of managing our money if we want to have some margin. Now, we said it right at the start of the series, I'm going to repeat today, this is not about you feeling bad. This is not about us and me trying to make you feel bad or feel guilty, right? I recognize, man, some of you, you're really struggling, and it's a miracle, right? That you can pay your bills and everything. Some of you, you're a single parent household. Some of you, you've lost a job, or you've experienced a big medical crisis you weren't expecting. And man, it is miraculous the way God has taken care of you, and you're able to even pay your bills and afford to keep the lights on, all those kind of things. And listen, I don't want you to feel bad because you're in that situation, right? But I want to help you kind of get to a new situations. And the reality is this, though. If 56% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, you remember that from the first week? 56% of households in America are living paycheck to paycheck. Not all of those got there by accident, right? So there's definitely a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck, not because something really bad happened this year, but because their choices, right? It's not an income problem, it's a spending problem. If we want to start living a different way and experiencing a different result, we have to start managing our money better. We have to become better managers and savers if we want to have more financial margin. Now, the reason that this is so important, I want you to understand, is because money at the end of the day is a spiritual issue. Money is our spiritual issue. Here's why. Because God doesn't need our money, right? God's not after our money. He's not after what we do with our money. But he recognizes that what we do with our money is the biggest indicator of what's happening in our heart. And so as a result, he talks a lot about money, because what God is most after is your heart and my heart. Jesus said, wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And for too often, our tendency is, God, you take care of my heart, I'll take care of my money, right? In fact, when we give our lives to Jesus, we talk about surrendering our life to Jesus when you're ready to accept what he did for us on the cross. And you, okay, God, you're in charge now. Jesus, you're the Lord of my life. And we baptize you and we say, look, everything that's about to go under the water, you're surrendering to Jesus. And this is a picture of what it looks like for some of you when you get baptized, right? You go under the water, but you're leaving that wallet out, okay? Like, Jesus, you can have all of this except the money and the finances. And it's just weird, but it's so true, because so many of us are ready to surrender everything. This is the last thing that we're willing to really turn over control over. What if today you and I decided, man, I'm going to give up control of this because the way I've handled it has not led me to a lot of financial margin. And maybe God, if he was in control, he would lead me to a better outcome here. So we're gonna start with a big parable that Jesus tells from Luke chapter 16. And this is a parable, like we've said about a lot of Jesus' parables, they wind up being about money. Now, they're not directly about money. This isn't a parable primarily about money. It's really primarily about heaven. It's about the kingdom of heaven. It's about the relationship God wants to have with us. But he talks about money to illustrate the relationship we're supposed to have with him. And this happens over and over again. And again, I don't think it's because of coincidence. I think it's because money is so directly tied in with our heart. When it comes to our relationship with God, it has a way of revealing where our heart is. So anyway, as we dig into this parable, I want you to pay attention to some key words that we're going to go through. We're going to look at starting in verse 1, and we're going to look at most of the verses through 13. Make sure that you go back and read all of this again later this week. But Luke chapter 16, starting in verse 1, here's the parable. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager, underline manager, right? There's a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. And so he called him in and he asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. This word for manager, by the way, is another word that we get, the English word steward. If you've ever heard of steward or stewardship, right? All right, it's a Bible word, but it means manager. This money manager is responsible for all of his master's stuff, all of his property, all of his bills, all of his business. Hey, you're not doing a good job, you're fired. And as the story goes on, you're going to start to get a little insight as to what this manager is thinking. Man, I don't have a lot of time here. I got to figure something out. And so what does he say? Verse 3, manager says to himself, what shall I do now? My master's taken away my job, and I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. So what am I going to do? Well, I know what I'll do. When I lose my job here, What can I do that people will welcome me into their houses? He calls then each of his master's debtors, people who owed his master money, and he asks the first one, how much do you owe my master? The response is 900 gallons of olive oil, which is a weird debt to pay, right? I don't know how many of you guys have ever, you got that credit card bill that comes in and says, hey, you're down to 898 gallons of olive oil. Anyway, it's a little weird. Maybe you could siphon something. But there's a manager and he says, listen, you owe 900 gallons of oil. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll make your bill 450 gallons. That's what you owe now. He cut it in half. Now that seems a little crooked, okay? I don't know if you've ever worked for a financial company, if you ever worked for a bank and you call somebody up and say, hey, I know that you owe $900, but special break today, I'm just going to cut that in half, right? I'm not even going to ask my supervisor. No big deal. And that seems weird. Like you think, man, what's he going to do? Get fired twice? I don't know. He's looking for a way to make some friends here, and so he cuts the guy's bill in half. Then he asks the second person that owes him money, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat. He's all right, well, make your bill 800 bushels of wheat. So you can cut it in half, but he reduces it 20%. That's pretty great. And at some point, he's reducing and slashing everybody's bills because he's trying to make some friends. And the master finds out about it. Now, you and I are probably thinking the same thing that Jesus' disciples would be thinking at this point. Oh, this crooked guy, he's not only is he going to lose his job, now he's going to get thrown in jail. But that's not what happens. In fact, the opposite happens. The master, instead of condemning him, commends him. Look what happens. Verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. What is Jesus saying here? This is kind of backwards. This is a real different take on what we were thinking. He says, listen, I wish that the people of God would be as shrewd in managing stuff as the people of this world are. This guy is dishonest, and he ends up being the example of what Jesus is kind of pointing out he wishes more people would do. What in the world? What is he possibly saying? Well, I think what he's saying is this. This guy understood he had a very short window of opportunity, and he made the most of his opportunity to try to make things better for himself. And I think Jesus is saying, man, I wish that the people of God would recognize that this limited opportunity that we have in this life needs to be used to make a dent in eternity. We have a very limited window of opportunity to use the stuff you and I have been given by God to handle. How can we leverage that? How can we invest that so we make an impact on eternity? We have such a limited time. We should be better managers, better investors, better savers with what we have so that we're making an impact on eternity. And this is what Jesus says, verse 11. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? What's he talking about? Well, he's talking about money. He's talking about being a good manager, a good steward of stuff. But what he's really saying is, listen, everything that you have has been provided by God. You don't own it. You don't get to take any of that stuff with you when you die. Everything you've earned, you're going to leave here. Everything you've built, you're going to leave here. The only thing that's going to matter is what happens in eternity. And the only way you can have an impact on eternity is how you leverage the stuff that you have in this short little window of opportunity we have called life. 70, 80 years, 90 years, it's done. And what will we have done with our stuff? Right? Who's going to trust you with more if you haven't been faithful with little? He says, verse 12, if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Who's he talking about? So about God, right? God has given us everything that we have. It's on loan. We're just a manager. How are we using that? How will we ever have something of our own if we can't show that we're good managers of what we have? And then he says this verse that we have shared each week. So now you know the context and the build up to this verse, verse 13. No one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one and you'll love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and you'd think it'd be, you can't serve God and the devil. You can't serve God and yourself. You can't serve God and sin. No, what does he say? He says you can't serve God and money because money is the number one competitor for your heart. cannot serve both God and it's really mammon. So it's not just dollars, right? It's not just coins or gold. It's all your stuff. It's all your stuff. We can't serve God and stuff. And we say, well, God, I don't serve stuff. I don't serve my stuff. And God says, yes, you do. Because whenever you say, man, I would love to be more generous to somebody, but I can't be. That's a little way of saying I'm serving my stuff instead of my stuff serving me as I serve God. Or I'd really love to have a little bit of money left over in our budget at the end of the month, but I can't because we're spending it all. And God says, you're serving your stuff. Because what you wish you could do with your money, you can't because you're serving it instead of serving God. Man, I wish that there wasn't so much tension at home and in my marriage and arguments about our stuff. Really, who are you serving? If you're not serving your stuff, what is that going? Do you find yourself in your prayer life with God? It's like, God, it's not, hey, Lord, I want to do what you would have me do. Help my money to serve me as I serve you. No, and instead it's, God, help bless me. Help me get this sale. Help me get the raise. Help me get a better price. You know, it's like we're inviting God. God, help me build my kingdom. Serve me as I serve my stuff. And so translating here, listen, we can't serve our stuff and serve God. We got to choose. And I think at the end of the day, money's a spiritual issue because, listen, God cares about how we use our money, not because he needs it. He gave us everything we have. He doesn't need anything from us. But because money is the best indicator of what's going on in here. And so God wants to get our attention so that he can transform our heart. So let's talk about some practical steps for how you and I can be a shrewd manager of the stuff God's putting in our hearts and our lives, the resources he's given us to live. How can we start using that better? How can we start leveraging that better? Because if we want to experience financial margin and a little bit more room and less stress and fewer money fights and arguments at home and honestly a better marriage, if you want those things, then we got to have a better way of behaving. And that better way of behaving is being a better manager of our money so we can start handling it differently, we can start saving for the future, and we won't be robbing ourselves or God of the potential. So the first thing we got to do, first step, very practical stuff, take some good notes today. Very first step in being better managers of money is to determine our annual available income. How do you determine your annual available income? Well, first you start with what are our total household salaries, right, for the year. That's total amount. And then we're going to subtract from that all of our obligations, right? So what are our debts? Like what we have to pay our mortgage payment. What is that in a year? How much is that? What are our other fixed bills in a year? What other sort of things do we have? We have payments or maybe you have taxes. Every year you got to pay taxes on that car, right? And the registration. What does that cost? And what else do you have? Do you have any other legal obligations? Maybe you owe child support, or maybe you have your wages are being withheld or garnished, right? Because of some legal reasons. So you're going to subtract all of those obligations from the total income. And once you subtract all of that, that is your total available income. So all that you make minus all that you have to pay, what's left is the available income. And that is a definite number, right? It's not a guess. It's not a question mark. It's not an about such and such. It is a number, dollars and cents. And some of you, you're going to start there today, and this is going to be revolutionary because you're going to start changing what you think is there to what actually is there. It's going to make all the difference in the world. It is a certain number. Now set that aside. And now if we're going to develop a little bit of a plan, the second thing we've got to do is we've got to start setting some goals. Right? In light of what I make annually, not just my available cash, but in light of what I make, what percentage, not how many dollars like I'd like to give, but what percentage would I like to give towards saving? How much of what I make total would I like to put towards saving for the future, saving for retirement, saving for kids' college, saving for, a vacation, saving for whatever it is up into the future? What percentage would I like to save? And what percentage of all of my income would I like to be giving away? How can I be generous towards supporting God's work and giving to the church? Maybe it's to giving to needs around the world. Maybe there's some projects that are helping families or kids in another place be fed or clothed or whatever. What are those things that I wish that I could do? We're not talking about reality yet. We're just talking about goals. What is the goal? What would you say is the goal that you would like to save and give? Now, take your available income for the year, subtract the goals that you have set from that, and what is left is your consumable income. This is what you have left to live on. And some of you will write that number down and pass out. But you need this dollar number. You need this actual fixed number, and you need to see it on paper, and you're going to write that down, and you're going to start fanning yourself, right? Because you're thinking, how in the world could we possibly live on that little bit of money? All right, you take out all the commitments, you take out the goals that you set for saving and giving, and you subtract that, and you've got this number, and you can, if you want to, you can divide it by 12, and that tells you how much it is every month. And that's your monthly consumable income. And you're going to look at that number, and you're going to have a stroke, okay? You're going to pass out because you're not going to think that you can live on that. But we have to do that. If you want to have a plan, you have to do that. I'm going to recommend you do that today before you go to bed. All right, before you go to bed. I want you to try to do this today. Tomorrow at the latest, right? And whoever else is in your household that looks over your finances, you're going to do this together, and you're going to work on this together, and you're going to experience the shock of that number together. But now you have an actual picture from which you can start planning. And until you have that, until you know where you are, you will not be able to map out a plan to get where you want to go. And for some of you, this is going to be revolutionary, right? To get where you want to be financially, to have some margin in your finances, to have a plan for how you can get there, right? You might not be able to do that this week. You're not going to be able to do that this month. You didn't get into the debt you have all of a sudden overnight, right? So you're not going to get out of that debt overnight. Not going to go and get the winning lotto ticket, whatever, and that's the way you're going to get out of your situation and into financial margin. No. We have to have a plan, and it's going to take a long time because we're going to walk out of the situation we're in towards where we want to be. But until you've done that, you can't do the most important step, the fourth step, which is actually coming up with a plan. You got to know where you are. So we got to figure out total income minus all the goals and obligations that we have. That's the consumable income. You got to have your little, heart palpitation moment together, and then you can start working on a plan together and how we want to get to a place where we do have some financial margin. Maybe what would it be like to have 20% of your money left over after all your obligations were fulfilled? 30%. That you could decide any given month what you wanted to do with that money. Think about the peace that would come from knowing that that is handled. Think about the clarity that you have as a manager of stuff that at the end of the day, in the light of eternity, does not actually belong to you. That you could give an account for where that is. So here are some big things that have to be a part of making our financial plan. The first is this: you got to track every dollar that you have coming and going. Christians especially, listen, you've surrendered your life to Jesus. Everything you have belongs to him, including all this money. You got to have an account for where everything came from and where it's all going. You have to track every dollar. Why is this important? Because it's not ours, right? Here's the analogy. If you hired me to come into your household and take care of your stuff, it's my job to handle your bills, to handle your bank accounts, to deposit your checks, right? To write off and pay all your expenses, to make sure there's money for the kids' lunches, to make sure that there's groceries that are ordered on time. If my job was to manage all of your money and you came to me and said, hey, Marty, I'd like a record so you could show me where all the dollars went this month, and I said, well, I don't know. I don't have any records. You would fire me. And some of you today need to fire yourselves because you're not keeping any record for yourself of where your money is coming in and where it is going. Right? How are we ever going to experience a different result if we're not actually tracking this stuff? It's amazing. We talk to people, man, so what are your debts right now? How much money do you have coming in? What are your bills? It's amazing how many of us say, oh, I don't know. Right? Well, I set that up on auto pay. I don't really pay attention. All right. I got everybody? Okay, here we go. Guess what? You and I are a manager of God's stuff, and he has entrusted stuff with us, and a lot of us wish we had more, and he's already said, you want to get more? You got to be faithful with a little. Why do we think God's going to give us more when we're not even tracking what he's given us now? It's not going to happen. We owe it to ourselves. We also owe it to our Heavenly Father to keep an accurate record of where our money is coming from and where it is going, and it's not just for you, right? But it's also as a steward, as a manager of God's stuff, to know where it's going. We're to track where it's going. And if we don't know where it's going, we're never going to create any margin. Listen, if you need more motivation than that in your marriage, I can guarantee you, if you don't have a plan, this is how your conversations about marriage go. Honey, it feels like, right? Or you're talking about money and it's like babe, it seems to me as though we're spending here. Or I think, to the best of my knowledge, this is what we might have in the account. You know, here's the thing. This is one issue you don't have to have any mystery about. Like, guys, ladies are a mystery, right? We're never going to figure that out. We won't. Girls, you're never going to figure your guy out. Like, it's just weird. But you both can figure out exactly, dollars and cents, what you have in the bank right now. There doesn't have to be any mystery. There is an actual concrete number, and you can figure it out with pen and paper or with a calculator or with a computer program or a spreadsheet. Some of you are really into this. Some of you guys do this stuff at work, and you would get like in massive trouble if it was off a few pennies, but you don't do it at home. This is fascinating. We got to figure out what this is. And listen, as soon as you do that, you won't have conflict in your marriage anymore. You'll have conflict right away for a minute, okay? First service really laughed hard when I said that. Okay. It's uncomfortable laughter. It's okay. It's good. Let's release the tension. But after you take a look at that, what that number is, after you actually both get on the same page about what you have in the bank and what actually is coming in and what is going out, then there's no more guesswork. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to think, or I feel, or it just seems to me like, listen, Exie and I, when we got on a plan together with our budget, we went through a class called Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University about 15 years ago, and we started working from a budget. I'm going to be honest, we haven't been perfect with it the whole time. We haven't always stayed nice and strict to it, but whenever we are on a budget, we never argue about money. We argue about everything else. We don't argue about money when we are on a budget, okay? Because when we both know where the money is, we don't have to point the finger or look at each other or ask questions and be accusatory or anything like that. And here's the amazing thing. When we remove the mystery, suddenly all sorts of other things become clear too. And I'm always surprised that what I thought was the case turns out to not really be the case. Like, oh man, babe, it seems like we're spending an awful lot of money on car repairs. Turns out it's actually restaurants. And we figure that out. Or man, it seems like we got carried away last year at Christmas. Turns out it was my trips to Home Depot. I really thought this before we had kids. If you'd asked me who spends more money on clothing, I would have said, well, of course, my wife spends more money on clothing. And we put this down on paper. I spent more money on clothes than my wife did. It was a shameful moment. I was just like, oh, I can't believe this. But there was no more question, right? It seems like, it feels like it was, this is what it is. And we need a system that kind of eliminates the mystery and gets us down to what we actually have. Now, what's the next step after we figure out and get a good inventory of where we are and what's coming in, what's going out? The next thing we need to start giving and saving. You need to start giving and saving now at the beginning of the process. And some of you think, well, Marty, I don't know. I got an awful lot of debt. Should I really start saving and giving now, or should I get out of the debt? Yes, you need to start saving and giving now. Why? Because saving and giving are habits. And the reason why you and I are in money woes, or why we have money stress, or why we're in a whole load of debt is because we had bad habits. And we've got to start putting some good habits in practice. The best thing we can start doing right now is developing a saving and a giving habit. And so you say, well, Marty, you just said like save 10% or give 10%. I don't think I can do that yet. Okay, what can you do? What percentage can you start right now, today, saving and giving? 1%? So you save 1%, you give 1% right now, and then we'll figure out what to do with the other 98%. Remember, we're setting a goal of 10% savings and 10% giving, but maybe you can't do that today. So you say 1, and then we get a month in, and we started to kind of change some of our expenses, and we started to reduce some of the things that we didn't need, and we started kind of make, hey, next month we can move that up to 2, or maybe jump right up to 3. Yeah, we got a lot more margin now, and maybe a couple months from then, hey, we're ready to move up because we've got a goal. We're trying to get to 10% saving and 10% giving and live off of 80. And until we get there, we're going to kind of keep moving things up as we go along. So become a percentage giver right now. Become a percentage saver right now. These are habits that we have to put into place before any of the other stuff is going to work. And then we can start talking about our plan. Now, next week, we're going to spend a lot more time talking about generosity. So this week, let me just say a couple more things about saving, because most people in America aren't doing it. And if most people in America aren't doing it, then most people in this room and watching online are not doing it. And here's why. Because there's basically 2 types of people. There are spenders and there are savers. Now, in the room, if you're a spender, if you're kind of more of a spender, you like to be able to like purchase stuff, and that's kind of where you go. If you're a spender, you want to be honest, raise your hand right now if you're kind of the spender. Maybe in your household, you're the spender, right? And chances are you're married to the opposite of you, right? You're a spender and you're married to a saver. Raise your hand if you're the saver in your household. Raise your hand if you're the saver. That's right. That's right. So you need kind of each other, because here's the deal. The spenders want to spend everything you have, and the savers are going to say, listen, we have to save something, right? Or else we won't be able to keep the lights on. And so you need the saver in your life. But listen, savers, you need the spenders in your life, because you're like, listen, we've got to save this money and we got to put this money aside. Marty's doing a whole series on money, and we're going to get serious about this. And your spender in your life is going to say, yes, but we can't eat rice and beans for the next year. You don't even like beans, right? You need a spender to let you remember, listen, there's things we have to do here. You need each other. So some of you guys, you recognize, listen, by the way, raise your hand again if you're the spender. Raise it up real high. Okay, ushers, would you come around real quick with the bucket? Okay, no, because they're not going to want to give next week. All right, here we go. So let's talk about saving just a little bit from Scripture here, because most people in our culture aren't doing it. Here's some scriptures about saving. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 to 8. Go to the ant, you sluggard. What a nice thing to say, right? Because somebody's reading the Bible, finally reading the Bible. God's, what do you got for me today, God? You sluggard. Oh, God, come on. Already felt bad. Consider its ways and be wise. What is the ant? You're going to look at an ant? Okay, why? It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food for harvest. What is the Bible saying? The Bible's saying, listen, look at an ant, how insignificant. You'd step on it, you wouldn't give it 2 thoughts. But an ant is smart enough to save for the future. And a lot of us aren't. There's more wisdom to be gleaned from the ant's behavior, putting aside food for later. What does the next scripture say? Proverbs 21, verse 20. The wise, what do? They store up choice food and olive oil. So they have storage. They have something saved for the future. But fools, what do? They gulp theirs down. Or another translation says they devour all they have. In other words, wise people don't consume everything that they earn. Instead, they save some leftovers for the future. But what kind of a person doesn't? What kind of a person eats up everything that they have? That's called a fool. Modern translation, he who lives by paycheck to paycheck. They consume everything they have. They spend every dollar they have coming in. The Bible calls us foolish. If we want to be wise, we have to start saving for the future. So let's talk about saving. What are some things that we can talk about for saving? Saving seems really, really basic. Right? Some of you are going to think the stuff that we've been talking about today is really, really basic. It is. It's very basic. It's not hard to understand. Our problem is not knowing what to do. It's doing it. My problem with all the financial problems that I've had in my life, all the times that Exie and I have got in an argument, every time that we haven't quite had enough money, you know what the problem is? It's not our income problem. It is the guy looking back at me in the mirror. I know what to do. I just don't do it. And this is our problem too. This stuff, of course, it seems basic, but we got to do it in order to get the benefit from it, right? So here are some 3 things that we're going to save for. We're going to save for emergencies. Everybody say emergencies. You know what an emergency is? Let me start by telling you what emergency is not. Emergency is not the new iPhone came out. That's not an emergency. You know what else is not an emergency? My iPhone broke when I dropped it on the ground. You knew you were going to drop it. Why didn't you buy the $5 screen protector so that it broke instead of your $5,000 phone, whatever it is, right? You knew that was going to happen. Put a little insurance on that thing. That's not an emergency. You know what else is not an emergency? Christmas is coming. Oh, who knew, right? It's like 12 months ago and it's already here again. By the way, it's like 6 weeks, right? So that's not an emergency. You know what is an emergency? Oh man, the car broke down. I had no idea. And it wasn't because we didn't change the oil, right? It was something unforeseen happened, or man, the plumbing sprung a leak. It got cold and it froze, and we didn't know. We got to pay the plumber to come out here and fix the leak. Or you know what else is an emergency? You got a toddler, and they were sitting at home, and they ate your wedding ring, and you had to go to the emergency room to pay a fortune on x-rays to find out that what you're going to have to do for the next few days is watch and strain their poop so you can get your ring back. And those are emergencies, right? That's what an emergency is. Some of you are like, oh, that's really, really gross. You don't have kids. That's really, really gross. And those of you with kids, you're like, I know it's gross. I've done it, right? And so it is. But here's the thing, we got to save for the unforeseen emergencies. And what we said is you need to start with $1,000, right? Minimum. That's not a fully funded emergency fund. That's $1,000 in the bank to get a little margin between you and the inevitable unforeseen emergencies that are going to come up with your finances. And if you don't have $1,000 already in the bank or already in a savings account that you have access to, I mean, you need to get that quick, okay? And you get that quick by, you can sell some stuff. You can go on like eBay or Facebook Marketplace. You can go on Craigslist. Just take a friend with you and make sure it's a well-lit place. Anyway, but you can sell some stuff that you got. You can sell the really expensive car that you're making payments on and go buy something cheap, right? You can do all kinds of things. You can work a couple extra shifts or you get a little, whatever. You can do this and get $1,000 in the bank really quick, okay? And once you have that, then we can start working on knocking out some of these other expenses. And then once we do that, then we can actually have a real emergency fund. A real emergency fund is anywhere from 3 to 6 months of your expenses put aside in savings. You know what happens when you have a real emergency fund put aside in savings? You sleep better. Your saver spouse sleeps better, right? One of you loses a job. Raise your hand if you know somebody that's lost a job in the last 5 years. If you know somebody that's lost a job. Maybe that is you, but you know somebody. You know yourself, right? So, listen, it might happen. It's not because of anything you did wrong. It's not because you messed up your job. It's because a company might let you go because they're downsizing. And it happens, and we're always inferior. You know what 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside and saving does? I can sleep at night and not worry about losing my job. Because if I did, I got 3 months to find another one. We're going to be okay. Oh, I get severance on top of it. Hey, you know what? Even better. We're going to be fine. You know what happens when you don't have an emergency fund, right? You don't have a job. You don't know how you're going to feed your family this month. That is a nightmare. This is why we need an emergency fund. We're going to save for emergencies. We're also going to save for future purchases. Everybody say purchases. All right, this is where we start talking about Christmas gifts and birthday presents, right? Those things are going to come up every year. So figure out how much you need to put aside every month so that you got a little bit of a budget to work with next year. All right, I'm not saying don't buy your kids something for Christmas. I'm just saying put a little bit of money aside every month for it. Some of you are lucky. You got an employer that sets that aside for you already, and you get that as a bonus every year. That's a great idea. That's a great way to kind of do that. If you're real disciplined, you can do that yourself. All right? Maybe you got to put aside for things that you know are going to come up every year. Your insurance premium, right? Your car tax, registration, those kind of things. Maybe every year, you know what? Every year we feel like we want to take a vacation. Well, maybe you could save for it instead of just pulling out that plastic card every time. Or other big purchases like furniture, whatever. You can start saving for future purchases. And then the last thing we're going to save for is just the future. What do we mean? We mean, hey, you might like to retire one day and eat something besides cat food. Okay? Maybe you'd like to pay for your kids to go to college. Maybe your kids like mine, we got some crooked teeth, some gaps in there. It's like, I'm going to have to pay for some of those things, the braces things. Apparently they're not free, right? You're going to have to save for those things. So we put away for the future. The problem is not that we don't know this very basic stuff. The problem is that you and I don't do this very, very basic stuff. And we've got to start doing this with our money and managing our dollars. Here's another thing you need to be a part of your plan. You need to have a debt reduction plan, This is so important, right? If you want financial margin, we've got to get out of debt. And I'm not just talking about your mortgage payment. I'm not even just talking about a car payment for a reliable car, and you're going to pay that off here in a couple of years. I'm talking about, the fact that we go and we put our groceries on a credit card and we don't pay that off every month. I'm talking about you had to go get a new nightstand, and so you put that on 90 days, same as cash. I'm talking about, you had to go to the dentist or whatever, and you didn't have the money to pay the bill, and so you put that on the care credit thing, at 29% a month. And all these little things that we start adding up become debts. How are we going to get rid of those things so we can actually start saving some money and start living on what we actually earn instead of spending more than we make? Well, we've recommended that you use a debt reduction plan called the Debt Snowball. I'm going to show you a picture of what that looks like. And here's a simple method, right? You can download this sheet. We're going to send it out to you later this week. You can always Google this. You can Google a budget sheet. All kinds of free resources. We're going to send some out to you this week, okay? Or you can Google them. But here's what a debt snowball is. You're going to take every debt you owe, from the smallest to the biggest. So if you own a house or a townhouse or something, you're paying a mortgage on that, that's probably going to be the biggest. That's going to be at the bottom of the list. Maybe you still owe a little bit money on the credit card, a couple $100. Maybe that's the smallest one here at the top, and you got some other stuff here in between. Maybe a medical bill's in there, maybe some furniture or whatever. Maybe you still got a student loan payment in there somewhere. And we're not worried about what the interest rate is. We're just worried about the payoff amount, smallest to biggest. And you're going to pay the minimum payment that you can on every debt, and you're going to put as many dollars as possible towards that smallest debt until it is paid off. You might be able to do that this week. You might be able to do that this month and get that bottom one off. And we're going to start with that. And some of you are like, well, yeah, but that one doesn't have any interest on it. It's like a medical payment. I can pay that off over time. I got this credit card bill that's like 20%. I should be paying that off first. Isn't that the right math? Well, yeah, but we're not talking about math. We're talking about behavior. If this was a math problem, you wouldn't have put anything on the credit card to begin with, right? Everybody say right. All right. So this is not a math problem. This is a behavior problem, and you and I have got to get some momentum built and get out of debt. You know what happens when you start losing weight? The best motivator is those first couple pounds that start to come off because, oh, man, I can do this. And that's the same thing with debt. You start paying off a couple of those little debts. You can start getting some momentum. You start feeling like, hey, man, we can do this. And then you pay off that littlest one, and then you take all that you were putting on that, and you start putting it on and attacking that next smallest debt. And you get that one paid off. And now we're starting to get somewhere. This snowball started at the top. Now we've gained a little bit of momentum. We're starting to put on some extra snow, some more layers, and that thing's starting to go downhill on its own now. It's got some momentum. And this is going to help us get out of debt. This is behavior modification. You've got to have a game plan. And if you're not attacking your debts, it's going to take forever. All right? I realize this is not normal. It's a little bit strange behavior. Maybe it's wildly strange that you're going to become weird. But you know what? Normal is broke, and I don't want to be normal anymore. I could use a little weird in my life, right? And the Bible calls us to be a particular people, to be distinctive from the world. Our world is in debt. Maybe you and I should be a little different from that. And maybe we'll start experiencing some different things. So a debt relief program, and you also need a lifestyle reduction program. You know what we call that, right? A lifestyle reduction plan? It's called a budget. Marty said the B word, right? Okay, everybody's favorite word, we're going to groan a little bit. None of us think we need this because we all think we got enough money that we don't need to worry about a budget. And yet the problem is we don't got a lot. We're not happy or satisfied with where we are. And the only way we're going to get out of the situation we're in is to start tracking every dollar. So you got to have a budget if you want to create some financial margin. Now look, this seems really simple. It's like, man, you're drowning in debt. Man, I need a budget. Yes, you do. But it's also just as simple. Man, we make $150,000 a year as a household. But we still got all kinds of stress. We still don't know where we stand. We're not really sure about where our bills are or where our future lies. You know what? Do you need a budget? Yes, you do. In fact, maybe even more so because you have more that you have to account for that God has put on loan with you. We need to know how much we're paying. We need to give every dollar a direction. We need to tell our money where to go instead of wondering at the end of the month where it all went. And so we're going to send you some tools. You can always go on to crown.org. This is Crown Financial Ministries. They have an awful lot of free or very, very inexpensive money tools that you can use. We highly recommend them and encourage you to go visit their website. If you are strapped in debt, you don't know how to get out, you need a budget. You got all kinds of money, but you're feeling the pressure of that, you need a budget. It's time to sit down and write down a plan, and it's time to admit what you don't know about your finances. I'm amazed at how many people just don't know what they owe, how much they need, what they're saving, how much could possibly be left over. And we are working in a fog and wondering why we feel pressure, wondering why everything seems like a mystery, wondering why we're arguing and fighting and pointing the finger and blaming when it comes to our marriage and our family, about our income and about our goals. And listen, if you and I will just do this, we'll just sit down and write down all of our income and all of our debts and what we want to do and where we are, we will have the raw numbers right in front of us. And yeah, it'll make you pass out. Yeah, it's going to make you upset for a minute. But then we can work together from the real information towards something we need to do. Now, can I just kind of take a step from all of this and can we just sit down together and talk about this like we're at the kitchen table together? Because listen, I want to tell you something that happened to me this week, and I want you to understand I'm in the same boat. All right, a couple weeks ago, I shared with you that one of the things that we do that's kind of crazy as a family is we run our cars until they're like way up there. You know, Exy's car's got 275,000 miles. This minivan, you know, it's just like all kinds of, in the check engine lights, it's always on. That's like just a little buddy. Hey, buddy. You know, that's how we know that the car's working. And wouldn't you know, as soon as I start talking about that's going to come up in conversation at home, right? And man, we've been driving this car for a long time, and it's got some cosmetic damage. And over the summer, it was overheating because it had like a radiator leak. And I found out that it was a radiator hose thing, so I fixed that. But now Exy's kind of gun shy about driving it, and she didn't want to be stranded somewhere. And she's like, we really need to probably get a more reliable car. I'm like, okay. And so I started car shopping. All right, I started looking for a car, and we didn't really have any change in our budget that we're anticipating that would like accommodate for a second car payment, but we really wanted her to have something reliable. So anyway, I'm hunting and I'm finding what I think is a deal. It's an awful time to buy a new car, used car even. But I'm driving her van to the dealership this week, and it's an hour away. And so I'm like, hey, I got some time in the car. I'm going to listen to some stuff about budgeting. Right? I'm going to listen to some other messages about budgeting for some of these people that we've talked about. And man, there's nothing like sitting in a car preparing to preach a lesson about money on the way to the car dealership to finance a car that makes you feel kind of queasy. And they start talking about, hey, people save money for big purchases. And I'm like, I don't know, this isn't right. And just then, the guy, the salesperson at the car dealership calls me and says, hey, before you come, I just want you to know that the shop's not quite done. Fixing your car's not going to be ready to take home today. And so I said, okay. And so I turn around and start coming home, and suddenly I feel this real big sense of relief, like, okay, good. We're not making this purchase today. And I'm like, what's going on with that? And then I notice my little buddy, Mr. Check Engine Light, is not on. And I'm like, that's weird. You've been on for like 10 months. It's like an O2 sensor thing, right? It doesn't affect the way it's running, but it's like, I'm not ignoring it, but it's like, it's not a big deal. It's just not going to pass inspection with the lights off. And I'm like, I should get this car inspected. And it passed. I'm like, this is like God's face shining upon us, right? This is amazing. And then I'm thinking, I don't know if we should do this. And so I call my wife, and I'm like, I'm honestly, at this point, I'm a little weirded out. I'm a little trembling. And I said, honey, I know we've talked a whole lot about getting you a reliable car. Now, please don't hate me, but I don't think that we should buy another car yet. I think that we should save the payment that we would have paid until our emergency fund is fully funded, okay? And she said, I don't hate you, but I get to drive your car until we do. And I said, okay. But I realized that, I know it sounds kind of crazy, waiting another year to buy a car or longer. In fact, I even sent a note to the dealer, the guy, and I was just like, hey, I know you might think I'm a little nuts, but I told you I'm a pastor, and I'm getting ready to talk about money, and I really feel like God doesn't want me to buy this right now. I'll call you back in a few months when we're ready. And he didn't say anything, but that's fine. I want you to know, we live in the same world that you do. And we have the same conversations that you do. We have bills, we have expenses. We've put some things on 90 days, same as cash before. And you and I have the same scripture that speaks to us. Hey, don't consume everything you make. Don't spend every dollar you got. Put some aside. And it's not easy, but we figure it out. And I tell you, if you're willing to make a plan and kind of step back some of your lifestyle a little bit and create a little bit of margin, start paying down your debts, this is really going to change. I mean, some of you are going to do what I said to do today. And you're going to sit down with your spouse and you're going to come up with this number. And you're going to say, here's everything we're making and here's everything we're spending. And you're going to look at that number and you're going to feel something. Because money affects people different ways, right? And different emotions are going to come. Some of you are going to see that number and you are going to get really, really scared. Like, I don't know how we're going to eat on $35 this month. You'll be scared. And I want you to lean into that moment and I want you to say, God, help me understand what I'm feeling right now. Because here's what I believe has happened. Money is a spiritual issue. And God is going to use this moment in your life to get attention from your heart. Because something's broken in here and he wants to fix it. And he's going to use this to get your attention. And some of you, you're going to sit down and you're going to look over this budget plan. And you're going to see that number and you're going to feel something different. It's not going to be fear. Some of you are going to feel jealousy. Because you're going to start thinking and comparing about where you think your friends are and where some of your family members are, maybe where you think your neighbors are, and you're going to start wondering, man, why don't we have something a little bit nicer? Why do we have to struggle? Why do we have to sacrifice? Why do we have to wait? And some of you, you're going to look at that number together with your spouse and you're going to feel anger. Because in your mind, your spouse has spent your way into this mess. And it's their fault. Anger is a spiritual issue. Worry is a spiritual issue. Jealousy, covetousness is a spiritual issue. Greed is a spiritual issue. And God wants to use these dollars to get your attention and possibly transform your whole life and your spirit when you realize that because where your money is, that's where your heart has been. And your heart, as some of you, has been in a really dangerous and hopeless place. You've allowed it to wander in all kinds of inappropriate and unusual places. Your lifestyle is something that you just can't afford or sustain. And so will you look at that number this week and will you just pause and you say, God, what do you want to do in me? This scares me to death. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to back down this far. God, What do you want to do with me? And some of you, I'm really praying, I'm really hoping you're going to say, God, I think you're right. There is something in my heart that you need to deal with. And you're going to use my finances to do it. What is it for you? Will you give him permission this week? Because this might be your breakthrough. Let me pray for you. God, I pray this morning that we'll admit we need a different kind of wisdom. We need your wisdom. Maybe it's the wisdom of the ant. Here we are, sophisticated human beings, but we're just not saving anything for the future. We're spending everything we got. God, I pray that, I know you want to heal some marriages right now, and this might be the way that you're going to do it. And get some husbands and wives finally, for the first time, maybe in years, on the same page. Literally. Some people struggling in their works and their jobs, decisions about that. And you're going to bring all kinds of peace just because they're going to sit down and do a budget. God, whatever it is, I pray that right now you're doing work in our hearts, that we would see that this isn't purely just a money issue. This is a heart issue. Lord, that you would search our hearts, and you would, maybe you're going to use money, that God, you would bring healing and hope and joy and purpose. That you'd lead us into that place where we finally get to use money as a tool rather than a burden. And God, I pray that you'd use us to build your kingdom, to be generous to other people, to show your love for other people through what we do with our finances. And God, right now, just in this next moment, would you just do a work in our hearts? I ask in Jesus' name.